a man of mystery from the Hobart suburb of Newtown.
Martin's good fortune, while it lasted, was to find a wealthy patron, one of the many heirs to the Tattersall lottery fortune. Helen Harvey regarded him as a surrogate son. My loyal friend, she called him, and left him everything in her will when she died in 1992. This rambling house in the inner Hobart suburb of Newtown.
I want to assure myself that everybody in there is okay. Are they all okay at the moment?
Well, I've been given a cup of tea and...
You gave them a cup of tea. Where are they at the moment?
I can't see that.
Well, okay. They're okay. I'll tell you, nobody's been harmed.
I'm a double bed at the present.
Right, nobody's been harmed?
No one's been harmed. I'm making up some sandwiches. These people have got salad and some bacon in them.
Right.
I want to fry up some bacon and eggs for them. I'm making up some sandwiches. These people have got salad and some... I'm making up some sandwiches. These people have got salad and some... Is there anyone hurt?
Well, I understand there's been a number of people hurt at Port Arthur.
I weren't killed.
Well, I don't know the full details.
Was there anyone hurt? I weren't killed.
And he was quite calm, collected, a childlike, effeminate sort of voice, and we were straight into a conversation. Bizarre. It was quite bizarre. I expected him to be in a highly agitated, aggressive state, or alternatively, sort of coming down and coming to terms that he didn't fit either of those sort of stereotypical ideas that I had.
You know what's going to happen if...
I don't want to see anybody hurt, alright? Okay, I'm organising that now, so I can also assure you that it's not our intention to hurt you or see anybody else hurt, okay?
Really?
he did so, and the negotiations continued throughout the evening with him talking for 10, 20, 30 minutes at a time, then having a break, and either he calling us or us calling him.
I want to assure myself that everybody in there is okay. Are they all okay at the moment?
Yeah, well, I've been giving them a cup of tea and...
You gave them a cup of tea. Where are they at the moment?
I can't tell you that.
Well, okay. They're okay. I'll tell you, nobody's been
they're
harmed.
on a double bed at the present.
Right, nobody's been harmed?
No one's been harmed.
Okay. You say that are all three persons in the same room?
Yes.
Okay, and there's nobody hurt at this stage?
No, not at all. No.
What about yourself? Are you all right?
Yeah, I'm fine.
The concerns for me in the decision making I had to go through was I was very mindful of the fact that there was possibly three people in the house. I had to decide were they alive? If they were alive, did I allow them to be burnt alive or to be consumed in the fire? Did I send the SOG in? The immediate action plan that had been presented me with a very difficult decision, because their estimate of casualties was in excess of 30%, which is a huge number of police officers to lose in an assault. So I had to balance up the advice I was getting as to the likelihood of the people still being in, the hostages still being alive, or risking the lives of further people to an effect an arrest and maybe rescue the hostages in a burning house. At the end of the day, I'm satisfied that we made the right decision in fact waiting and forcing him to come to us as opposed to vice versa.
Fine, couldn't do better, just like on a Hawaiian holiday.
Hawaiian holiday?
Yes, that's correct, sir.
Oh, I'm sorry, I don't understand what you mean by that.
I don't know myself, no.
Jamie?
Yes, hello, how are you?
I'm very well, thanks, Jamie. Yourself?
Well, I'm well up till now, in the past few 20 seconds. What I've actually found out, man, is that one of your boys is right outside, north-east, I'd say, with an infrared scope. Can you just ask him to move on?
All right, we'll do that. We'll do that now.
He's going to shoot, he's trying to shoot, he's going to shoot your main man. He's trying to shoot, he's going to shoot your main man. He's going to shoot, he's trying to shoot, he's going to shoot your main man. He's going to shoot, he's trying to shoot, he's going to shoot your main man.
Reliable.
John Radler of CNN wrote to the Commissioner of Police saying, "The access, cooperativeness and forthrightness of police to speak with the media was excellent, as good as we have encountered anywhere in the world, and significantly better than most places. I rate Tasmania Police's performance vis-a-vis the press in the Port Arthur shootings a 99 out of 100.
Well, if you want a bottle shop in Tasmania, you have your choice of 911 bottle shops. 911. Isn't that interesting now? Now, this was in place before 9/11 happened. A bit of pre-programming. And Sandy Bay. 86 Sandy Bay. We've seen that 86 and we've seen that Sandy before, haven't we? Very interesting place, Tasmania. And nothing more interesting than Port Arthur. Now, this is where Australia's greatest massacre happened. The lone gunman Sandy Hook style.
The Joint Intelligence Group gathered data and began to put a name to the gunman, together with his background, family, friends and contacts. Special Operations Group Commander Hank Timmerman.
Members were shot at in the positions that we held around the stronghold continuously. So we waited till the cover of darkness. When we did start to move closer, in fact one of our observers got to within about 75 metres of the stronghold, We were then informed via the negotiators that that Bryant could see one of our marksmen in the field. Now, we weren't sure how we could see him, and so one of our first thoughts was that he had night vision capability with his firearms, so that made it a little bit more tense again.
Ray Groom, you backed the coroner's decision not to have a coronial inquiry on the grounds, I think, that it would distress families unnecessarily because Martin Bryant had pleaded guilty. How many families or victims themselves did you actually consult before you backed that decision?
I've had a lot of contact with many of the families involved, Kerry, and the victims, those who were wounded, and of course also the general community of the peninsula and around Tasmania. There's no doubt at all that the common feeling is that we should get on now with the healing process. I don't believe it's in the public interest of the people of our state and those concerned to have a long drawn out public inquiry into this matter when the facts are quite clear. I believe it would be very, very traumatic. The government has a firm view about that we do want to try and put it behind us, and the issue being on the front pages in the headlines day in, day out has not helped our state. It's been very damaging to our community in very many ways.
Well, Stephen Howard is one victim who lost his wife, and he's quite passionate and pleads for a coronial hearing because he believes that all the facts haven't been laid out on the table.
I've not heard directly from Stephen. I've met Stephen. I know Stephen. I've had discussions with him. He hasn't put that view directly to me.
Mr. Groom's remarks seem strangely at variance to the reply Stephen Howard received from Mr. Groom, which read in part, "I regret that I cannot accede to your request. I have considered these reasons in determining that it is inappropriate to require an inquest or further inquire into the death of Mrs. Howard. The legal obligations upon a coroner do not extend to the matters which you have raised in your letter."
A man of mystery from the Hobart suburb of Newtown.
By Tuesday, the newspapers had pictures. Murdoch's Hobart Mercury treated their picture in a most extraordinary way, unfolding their tabloid format into a broadsheet front page.
This is the man.
Our Tasmanian audience has his face obscured, but not the Mercury's readers. In a facile and futile attempt to avoid being in contempt of court by prejudging the man's guilt in Tasmania, where he'll be prosecuted, the Mercury explained the picture thus.
This is the man whom Tasmanians want to face 35 murder charges.
This is the man who allegedly...
Did they think that loan allegedly protected them?
Who allegedly, calmly, chillingly, coolly and brutally stalked and gunned down men, women and children.
This man is Martin Bryant, 28.
All three Murdoch papers distributed in Tasmania, the Mercury, Herald Sun and the Australian, showed the man's face. No doubt gambling that identification would not be an issue in any prosecution and, dare I suggest, assuming that the authorities would lack the courage to take on the most powerful media corporation on earth. As to that, we shall see. Launceston's Examiner had a better news picture, the man in custody and arriving at hospital, but...
Mr. Bryant's face has been blacked out for legal reasons.
For the mainland audience, this is the picture as the Examiner could have run it, but didn't.
The DPP, Mr. Damien Bugg, QC, placed all media outlets on notice yesterday that he would pursue contempt action against any broadcaster or publication whose coverage of the tragedy prejudiced the trial of the alleged gunman.
And if pre-trial coverage by the media in some enthusiastic desire to disclose as much as possible to the public results in a person being deprived of a fair trial, I wouldn't call it a legal nicety at all.
Since then, the DPP has given notice of prosecutions of the Australian, the Mercury, the Age and the ABC. Meanwhile, the Courier Mail thought it had a bit of a scoop of its own, a picture from the Newtown High School's yearbook.
A young Martin Bryant at Newtown High School.
Only it wasn't.
The photograph was not of Martin Bryant, but of Michael Robert Bryant of Hobart,
who may not be prepared to settle for something as little as a one-sentence apology hidden between advertisements on page 2 3 days later. But there's more to be said about News Limited and that photograph. First, it was run by every one of Rupert's Australian prints: the Advertiser, the Herald Sun, the Telegraph, the Courier Mail, the NT News, the Hobart Mercury, and of course the Australian. And Tasmania can join us for the close-up. In no paper was there any fiddling with the picture. The eyes were shown thus, except in the Australian. There the whites were painted in and the pupils were darkened. Result, the eyes of a crazy killer. An enormous number of people spotted the enhancement, such a genteel euphemism, and Wednesday's Oz carried this explanation.
An attempt to remove shadow from the subject's face unintentionally led to the complete removal of colour from the whites of his eyes. No editorial instruction to alter the photograph was given.
We believe you, Mr. Kelly. Hundreds of thousands wouldn't. Paul Kelly didn't mention a botched attempt to remove shadows when he spoke to AM.
The treatment of the eyes was a mistake. It was done in the production process. The important point to make is that there was no editorial direction given, there was no editorial instruction given to change the eyes at all.
Researching this question for our own purposes produced a squeal of protest from the editor-in-chief at the Oz.
Dear Mr. Salter, on 2 occasions this week, we have had reports of Media Watch contacting staff on the Australian, or within the company, in relation to our publication of the photograph of the Port Arthur gunman.
The Australian's boss then made a demand he would have laughed at if it were imposed on his journalists.
I would request that if Media Watch has any queries, that it should approach myself or Mr. Schmidtke directly.
Don't wait by the phone, Paul. When he was talking to Suzanne Smith from AM, there was a related question about that photograph that Kelly seemed reluctant to answer.
There have been claims that the photograph was obtained from Martin Bryant's house. Is that correct? Do you wish to answer that, Mr. Kelly?
Well, the Australian obtained the photograph from the Hobart Mercury.
Would you please answer the question?
Did members of News Limited staff, though, enter Mr. Bryant's house to obtain that photo?
Certainly nobody from the Australian did.
So you're saying someone from the Hobart Mercury might have?
I don't know.
An uncharacteristic lack of curiosity for such a senior journalist. How did the Hobart Mercury get the photographs of Martin Bryant and hand them on to all those other Murdoch papers?
Doubts persisted over how the photographs, which appeared on Tuesday, had been acquired, the police public affairs manager, Mr. Jeff Easton, said.
He said he was unaware of any complaints of a break-in at Mr. Bryant's suburban Newtown house.
Well, the occupant was otherwise engaged, wasn't he? But 2 journalists employed by the Mercury seemed terribly familiar with the interior of the house.
From the street, it offers no clues as to the identity of its inhabitant.
But Stuart Potter and Sue Bailey report that on closer examination, it revealed some details of Martin Bryant's lifestyle.
Thereafter, it becomes obvious that Potter and Bailey have been through the place with a fine-tooth comb.
Display cabinets are cluttered with old dolls, figurines and trinkets. Figurines also sit on picture rails in the lounge room and entrance foyer.
The kitchen, too, like the rest of the house, is cluttered.
Any photographs among the clutter? The Mercury's editor is Ian McCausland. May we ask you, Mr. McCausland, who obtained the photograph and from where? We've inquired of the police, and this is what Mr. Easton told us.
One constable was on duty guarding the house, and that constable definitely did not give Potter or Bailey a guided tour of Bryant's house. Police suspect a 3rd person was involved. 2 people distracted or otherwise engaged the constable, while a 3rd party entered the house.
McCausland's paper, indeed every Murdoch paper, has managed to ignore the story about their photographs.
Last night, with young police officers standing guard on these scenes, you can imagine the thoughts that were going through their mind in the darkness as they were having to protect the bodies.
Have there been tears shed, do you think?
Oh, I've got no doubt about that.
Constable Debbie May, along with several other forensic service officers, were given the job of recording the scenes inside the Broad Arrow Cafe.
We tried as much as we possibly could to remain detached from the emotional side of the job. Our job is so involved. We spent hours and hours with the bodies that we just couldn't afford to get emotionally involved.
Extraordinary pressure was placed on the civilian staff of the Royal Hobart Hospital. Dr. Tim Lyons.
I think it is true to say that people did become extremely fatigued and tired towards the end of that week, and I think that's reflected in the fact that many people felt tired for a number of weeks afterwards. But I think that everyone pulled together during that 10-day period in an unparalleled fashion, and I think it's reasonable to quote from Professor John Clements, who's a professor of odontology in Melbourne, who had attended many major crash scenes, including those at Lockerbie and the Townsend-Torresden Ferry, and he said he came to Hobart wondering what the feeling would be in the individuals concerned, and he said he found it quite unique, and it was an experience that he felt proud. He said he felt proud to be involved with those people working in the mortuary, and I think that's a compliment from an experienced person in this field.
During the 18 hours of the siege, Martin Bryant had fired over 250 rounds of .308 ammunition. He had come armed and ready for action. Sergeant Gerard Dutton of the Tasmania Police Ballistics Section.
This weapon's a 223 calibre Colt self-loading rifle, model AR-15. This was the weapon that was used in the cafe where 20 people died. This particular gun fires a bullet at around about 3,200 feet per second. This was one of the guns that the offender used at the various scenes at Port Arthur. It's fitted with a 20-round magazine. Brian had with him was this shotgun. It's a Daewoo shotgun made in Korea. It's a self-loading shotgun. Operates, which that means every time you pull the trigger there's a shot fired. This was found in the boot of his vehicle with a loaded magazine. Holds 10 cartridges. This bag of 308 cartridges was found also in the Volvo vehicle at the toll booth. His car, you see, he was well prepared for whatever he had planned.
In a first for Tasmania Police, the entire investigation file was compiled on computer. Task Force investigator Robert Bond.
I'd say probably over 1,000 people interviewed.
Not just in Australia?
No, certainly not. No, internationally. And it resulted in something like 1,060 statements statements alone being taken, disregarding any other documentation. As far as internationally is concerned, there was inquiries made in England, in America, I think there was one in Sweden. We didn't have to have folders of photos and folders of documentation sitting all around us. Whenever we were addressing a particular issue or a specific issue, we could navigate our way through the file using this system without having to access different folders, perhaps up to 5 or 6 folders at a time, looking at photos or statements. Okay, in this particular instance, this guy Belasco took a video at the scene. Again, we've inputted the video on the computer. And if we click on that,
there's somebody going crazy shooting people here. There he is. He's over there. I can't believe it. That's the guy right there.
I filmed as much as I could of him shooting, often to the distance and at different objects. At some point he saw me shooting or videotaping because I was sticking out like this behind the camper, the back of the camper, and through the viewfinder I could see him take aim at me with his gun, and I just dropped to the ground. You can see that on the film, and then at the moment you can hear the shot that he shot over my head loud and clear.
So if you hadn't dropped to the ground.
7 months after that April Sunday, Martin Bryant was sentenced to life imprisonment. The case was closed, but the dreadful memories remain. Tasmania Police have been truly put to the test.
Without individualising, in a universal sense, I think that the training, the commitment and the professionalism shone through. We've always practiced and trained for a situation like that, hoping perhaps that it would never happen. So our result, I think, was as good as one could expect under the circumstances.
Yankee 1-1. Can you ascertain, do they have the offender in custody, over?
A person has been taken into police custody, conveyed to the Royal Albert Hospital, suffering from burns, no gunshot wounds. He will, we expect, appear before the court later today or tomorrow, so we obviously can't comment on motive or anything else like that, but I'm happy to make Mr Fielding, who was the forward commander in charge of the operation down here, available to answer your questions about how the situation unfolded, and then we'll talk about how we'll facilitate your opportunity as media to get a look at the house, which has been destroyed by fire, burnt to the ground, and then to progress on to some of the other sites that will be obviously of interest to you.
It became necessary during the course of the morning to identify the fact that the media were expressing such considerable interest in attending the scenes that we should facilitate that. So it became imperative that as soon as the crime scenes were cleared from a scientific perspective and an evidentiary perspective, that we allowed them access. And we did that by making 2 coaches available to transport them through the scene, and in a very ordered way they were given access to each of the sites at which the various murders had occurred, and under very strict guidelines were entitled to film the sites where the bodies had been located.
A young lady was driving the vehicle behind me, leaving this area, and the offender has driven along the road, heading towards the last scene that we were at, and has fired through the passenger side front window of the vehicle and struck the driver, fatally wounding her. So this vehicle here is available for you if you want to just take a few shots of it, and then we'll move on to the next site.
She was very frightened.
So he had a stare?
Yes.
That made
a glare.
you frightened?
Yes, yes, yes. And a grin too, really. You know, just the way he'd grin at you too.
He threatened to kill you?
Yes.
In less than an hour on Sunday afternoon, Martin Bryant won a place in the pages of infamy. In common with others charged with committing mass murder, his life was on one hand unexceptional, on the other completely bizarre.
He actually used to sleep with a pig during the day. The pig was obviously living inside.
In the house?
In the house. And his words was he was swearing that pig pissed on me while he was asleep. The whole house was full of animals, probably 30 or 40 cats and dogs, as many birds, crammed into a house.
Martin, someone to be avoided.
We went out along the driveway. Martin was behind us. We didn't know that he was there until he was speaking. He said, "Don't ever come here again or I'll shoot you."
Don't ever come here again or I'll
shoot you. Yeah.
Did you feel more comfortable having your guns with this bloke living next door to you?
I went out and bought a gun that I knew would equal whatever he had.
You did?
Yes.
And your motive in doing that was?
Just in case I ever had to use it.
A tense standoff ensued, with the Featherstones convinced Martin was prowling their property at night.
I try not to let the kids know that the fellow was out here every night. I found footprints everywhere.
Footprints in your yard?
All around on my property, because I'd recently ploughed it. My dogs were being let off. My mother had knocks on the door, and there was someone walking around the house. She wasn't sleeping. I told him I'd had enough. And the next sort of clearish night I could see in the dark, I would go out and hunt him down.
But eccentric and unreasonable behaviour was one thing. The manner of Helen Harvey's death in a car accident left the Featherstones deeply unsettled.
Because we'd constantly hear where she'd run off the road, Martin had pulled the wheel, my brother had to pull her on the road, went into a ditch, and she actually told us that Martin had this bad habit, just out of the blue, grabbing the steering wheel and wrenching on it, and she'd run off the road. That's why she only ever done about 30 mile an hour. Because she didn't know when the kid sitting next to her would reach for the wheel. When Martin, the normal Martin, would turn into a supposed kid that would actually wrench on the wheel, yeah.
Do you think that that's what happened on the day of that accident?
I believe so.
You do?
Yes.
Martin was badly injured, but when he recovered, found himself a wealthy man, for Helen's bequest had set him up for life. His father joined him on the farm, but just a few months later, his body was found in a dam. The police accepted that he'd taken his own life.
He was found by divers. Divers come down from the police academy. He was supposedly found with a diver's lead belt around his neck.
And what was Martin's response to his father's death?
As if it never happened.
Just what demons possessed him is a source of wonder way beyond this normally tranquil backwater. But in the wake of the killings here, the locals are in no mood for a debate about gun control. He certainly turned his back on the comfortable life his benefactor had envisaged for him. A provision of Helen Harvey's will is that he be buried in the same grave as her in the Cornelian Bay Cemetery on the outskirts of Hobart. But the families of his victims will never rest in peace. Tonight, they're meeting in this small community hall near the massacre site to begin the long recovery from what happened at Port Arthur.
We've never really seen footage of this guy. All we've seen is pictures.
Tasmanians have been disgusted by a Facebook site claiming Martin Bryant did not carry out the Port Arthur massacre. Instead, it blames a former policeman. Michael Dyson's trying to have the offending page removed, so far without any success.
Martin Bryant actually pleaded guilty to shooting dead 35 people at Port Arthur in 1996, but now an outrageous and very public conspiracy theory has been flagged on Facebook, declaring former policeman Michael Dyson was the gunman.
These people that are involved in this are just raving lunatics as far as I'm concerned. They're showing no sense at all.
Mr Dyson's only involvement in the case was to search Bryant's home after the massacre. Now the retired cop has had his face plastered over the site, as well as his contact details.
There's freedom of speech, that's a fair argument, but then there's also the responsibility that comes with that, and someone must be held accountable for what has been put on the internet.
Disturbingly, a handful of Facebook users seem to agree with the theory that Bryant was innocent, while others registered their disgust at the site. Police have been contacted over the webpage. They say they are powerless to act. As well, Mr Dyson has requested Facebook remove it. That was 4 days ago, but still there's been no action.
When the community itself rises up and revolts, then more than likely they will bend to popular opinion, whether it's legal or not.
There have been growing calls for the federal government to try and control some internet forums. Even the Prime Minister has expressed his concerns. Damien Ryan, 9.
I mean, if I'd backed off, I'd have looked hopeless and weak, and people would have thought, well, you know, he's not fair dinkum. How many more people need to be murdered by a madman to convince the government to do something? Those sorts of things, if you don't deal with them decisively, they weaken people's faith in the institution of governments.
And the green and white stripes from Sandy Hook, well, they also are shared by the Omen and by baby Sarah Ferguson. And black dogs for the dog star Sirius, of course. Little Martin there in his green and white stripes. So this guy was selected for this role at a very young age. In fact, he appeared on television burning himself with fireworks in 1979. But that interview, if you have a look at it as a child, looks really fake, just as this interview with the alleged mother. Now, this is from 60 Minutes a few years ago. I will do another video and analyse this interview, but she is just talking shit, as you'd imagine. It's all just acted out. Like with 9/11, we don't seem to see any of these victims anymore. A little bit of kerfuffle when it happened, but since, they've all disappeared. Now, Martin also comes from Newtown. Newtown. We've never really seen him. They show us a picture of a jail and say he's inside. There's no real evidence. His mother pops up on television, but we don't know it's really his mother. But of course, all the sheep in Australia just go bang, bang, and they argue the next day saying, "Did you see that Martin Bryant's mother on TV last night?" And blah, blah, whatever they think about her, this way or the other. Creates interest, and it creates dialectic, and it keeps the hoax rolling. Yes, I think there's some real power down here in Tasmania that is hidden. I mean, they've done some amazing things down here. Some very rich Scottish free right families. And no wonder they chose this area for their little ritual hoax. Now, if you do a Google search for the victims of Port Arthur, the only thing that comes up in the images is this, the Port Arthur Memorial Garden, and a list of names. We can't seem to find any pictures that fit the names. It really is like the mysterious Port Arthur, the case of the smiling stiffs. You just can't find anyone who knows anything about it.